Have you ever suddenly had a great idea for a film or a video? You go to plan it, script it, and create your shot list. This is your best idea yet, and now your idea is all wrapped up and ready for production. But then you wake up on the shoot day and remember that you only have one light. And you think, how in the world am I gonna pull this film off with just one light? Well, what if I told you the intro you just watched was lit with just one video light? And not only one light, but one tiny 60-watt light. And what if I told you that you could do this too? And I'm gonna show you how by breaking down the lighting and cinematography techniques that I used to create each shot in the scene you just watched. So let's get into it then. Hey, what's happening? My name is Ryan, and if you're new with us, welcome. I truly appreciate you being here. Over the years, I've collected a lot of the gear that I own today. But I remember in the earlier days of my career, I had to get really creative and find solutions for the images I envisioned in my head because of my limited access to the gear that I needed to pull it off. Filmmaking is all about finding creative solutions to the issues you might have on set. And I know how frustrating it could be to be limited in the things that you want to create. So I thought I would challenge myself today and create a scene using only one tiny little 60-watt light. And I'm really excited to show you some of the creative solutions that I came up with. So let's dive in. First, really quick, let's start with the gear. For this, I'm just using the Sony FX3. I use this for almost every video that I do, but I'm not using this camera for any particular reason. You could absolutely use just whatever camera you have. I'm also using the Sony 24-70 G Master lens. The only reason why I picked this is because I can just quickly change my focal length if I wanted to, and it just allowed me to work a lot quicker. And on top of that, I just have the V2 magnetic filter system by Freewell, and I also have the glow mist on top of that. For my light, I'm using the Zhiyun Molus X60. Now, this is a pretty powerful 60-watt light, but it's also just a 60-watt light, so I had to get as much as I could from it. So I have a couple of modifiers, just a bounce card that I actually got from the grocery store, bought it from Walmart, super cheap, maybe a couple bucks, and I use that as a bounce card, and it works out really great. I'm also using the Zhiyun Bowens mount adapter and reflector. One more thing, I'm also using the Sennheiser MKE 600. This is the shotgun mic I use for almost everything and every single video. As a matter of fact, I'm using it right now for this talking head, so this is what it sounds like. And I also have that on the top handle that came with the Sony FX3 so that I can capture my own Foley and my own sound effects so that I can add it into the video and post. Okay, so enough of all that. Let's get into the lighting breakdown. First, let's start with this sunset shot. Now, there are two parts to the scene. There is the scene where I grab my computer. The second half is me sitting on the couch. For the first half of the scene, I really wanted to get those shadows from the window. I filmed this at night, and then I placed the X60 outside to shine through the window, set it to 2700 Kelvin to emulate sunset. I had this at 20%. Then I just filmed a wider version of that to use as my establishing shot. Now, for the second half of this scene, I shot this at blue hour, and I actually shot it before the first half of the scene. The reason why I did that is because I knew that this window here was gonna be in the frame. So I needed it to look like blue hour, or at least I needed it to look like the end of the day. All of the other shots in this scene or this part of the sequence didn't show any daylight per se. So it was important for me to get this shot during the actual end of the day. Now, this was with just one light, but because that light was facing in to the window, it was bouncing off this white card that I had on the shadow side of me to lift those shadows a little bit so that I can have more of that information in post-production. I set it to 2700 Kelvin, I believe, and I left it at 20%. I decided on a backlighting technique because we only have the one light. Doing this forces us to shoot on the shadow side, which actually adds a lot of depth. And for a lack of a better term, it really just gives you a lot of bang for your buck when only having access to one light. And then after that, I just faced the camera in front of me. Everything remained the same except for the bounce card, which I removed because this was a wider shot and I didn't really need it, which leads us into the next shot of this montage sequence, and that is the table scene. Now, this one's interesting because a while back, I think a year and a half ago, I did a video on how to expose for your window light. And in that video, not that long ago, actually, I got a comment from someone who's asked if I could do the same thing, but with a 60-watt light. And I thought, yeah, why not? Let's try it. I filmed this closer to the end of the day, and I set my light to 5600 Kelvin because I didn't want it to feel like sunset anymore. I wanted it to feel like a totally different day, and that it was the middle of the day. So I set it all the way to 100%, and I bounced it off of this white card here to diffuse the light a little bit. I also tried to create some leading lines with the table here and really focused the attention on the middle of the frame so that the eye doesn't have to wander too much. This is a technique used in Hollywood a lot where you try to center everything or keep it in one area as you're moving through a quick montage of shots so that way the eye doesn't have to wander. Hey, what's happening? Future Ryan here. I've been watching the playback and I realized I didn't think it was enough to show you how I did it. I also wanted to show you why this actually works. Number one, I filmed this at the end of the day, and that is for two reasons. Number one is because as the sun sets and gets closer to the horizon, it diffuses that light a little more because the light has more to travel through, which gives me softer light. And the second thing is because the sun is actually in front of me and not behind me where this window is. So I didn't have to battle harsh lighting coming through the window. The last thing I'll say is for this scene and for this whole sequence in general, I was going for more of a higher contrast ratio, meaning that I wanted to have a stark difference between my highlights and my shadows. And I also wanted my shadows to be a little bit darker. Because of this choice, I was able to expose for the window light and not have the subject in the frame be as lit up as if I were to film a commercial shoot. If I was doing a professional commercial shoot, I would probably go for something more like a 300 watt light, which is actually what I did recently in this project that I'm collaborating on. Here's the final shot for that. However, this could work. It all depends on the look that you're going for, but I wanted to explain that there are different scenarios and different things that come into play. For any shot in general, it's always gonna come down to quite a few elements, like what kind of natural light are you working with, what kind of gear you have accessible to you, what kind of contrast ratio are you going for, or what is the structure within the script that you need to meet. All of this is gonna come into play when you're filming a scene, but I just wanted to show you that it is possible to do this with just a 60 watt light if you know what to look for and you know how to creatively get around some of the limitations that you might have in your particular situation. Okay, after that is the next shot in the montage, and that is outside on the steps. This one was super simple. I just had the 60 watt light off to the lit side of my face. I decided to leave it at 5600 Kelvin, and I actually also shot this one towards the end of the day on a separate day. I did this behind my house where the sunlight was in front of my house, and so I was able to shoot in the shadows there, but I did have this hot spot over here in the field and over in the background, which was a little bit difficult to work with. I definitely had to bring the ND filter down a lot, and I cranked up the X60 to 100%, and that seemed to work out just fine. Here is a side-by-side of what that looks like without the light and then with the light. It's super subtle, but I think it turned out well for what it is and the limitations I had to get the shot. The next shot in the scene is the sunrise scene. For the wide and the medium, I just set my X60 outside through the window. This was actually at sunrise, so that worked out really well. The sun doesn't actually rise on that side of the house, it actually rises on the opposite side, but that worked out really well because I was able to control this sunrise light a lot better. I think I set this to around 30 to 40% because it was a lot lighter outside and I needed to compete with the sunlight. I set it at 2700 Kelvin, and I set this a little bit higher and pointed it downward to emulate kind of the direction that sunrise would come in naturally. Now, one thing to note is that because of the direction of our sunlight and the context within the scene, that acts as our point of reference of what this light is and where it's coming from. For the close-up, I just brought the X60 down a bit, still keeping it outside the window, and I repositioned it too from the bed over to the dresser. Now, of course, the sun probably wouldn't move around like that, but when you cut these two together, you really don't notice it, and your brain just kind of pieces those two things together, and I thought it worked out really well. Following that is me picking up the X60. Now for this, I'm challenging myself to only use this one light, so I couldn't use any other of my studio lights. I can only use this one light, so I didn't have a light to light me up. So for this medium shot of myself looking at the light and tossing it in the air, I just set myself up over by the window so I can use the window light as my key light. Didn't show the window in the shot because I didn't want any harsh highlights that I'm gonna have to battle in post. You could see the window light coming in, and also too, because of the shot before that where you see window light coming onto the table, backlighting the X60, this acts as our point of reference so we know where this light is coming from. I shot this one at 50 millimeters and the close-up also at 50 millimeters to not make it such a jarring cut back and forth. I really wanted it to feel like it's in that same moment, and I think that decision worked out really well. So the question is, can a 60 watt light create cinematic impact? Well, for me personally, it depends on story, the scene, the conditions, and so many other factors that can come into play. But the cool thing is that you absolutely can. If you know what to look for, it works well for the story, and you can get creative with how you shape your light and drive the narrative of your scene. And the best part is if you can practice these often and get to know these cinematography tips and techniques very well while adding in your unique perspective and vision to the film, you can truly create something that stands out from all the rest. So I just want to encourage you to try some of these techniques, practice them often, and just get out there and make some films, because you've got this, friend. Well, that's gonna do it for me. Thank you so much for joining me in this video. If you liked this video or you learned something, please click the like button down below. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.